Hopefully. We're starting now. Your Excellencies, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, today is the 7th August 2020, and the time is just shortly after 9:30 GMT in Banjul, Republic of the Gambia, West Africa. This is a virtual transmission of the closing ceremony of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Commission. On the 13th July 2020, the African Commission held its opening ceremony to commence its proceedings of the 66th ordinary session of the Commission. The Commission hosted a public session for 13 session days. On the 28th July 2020, the Commission retreated into its private session for 8 session days, which ended yesterday, the 6th August 2020. The Commission is now today convening to resume its public session in order to deliver its final communique and close the proceedings of the 66th ordinary session. Now, before we begin the proceedings of today, I would like to clear a few guidelines for our esteemed panelists. First, please ensure that your microphones are switched off and that they remain switched off unless the floor has been yielded to you. Second, in order to access language interpretation, please click on the interpretation function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For English, select English. For French, select French. For Portuguese, Portuguese. For Arabic, select the Korean channel. Thirdly, if you are disconnected for any reason or need assistance, please take advantage of the chat feature on your Zoom screen, and our able staff will be alert to assist you. We will now commence the proceedings of the closing ceremony of the 66th ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Your Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Honorable Solomon Deso, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Excellencies, Ministers of Member States of the African Union, Honorable Heads and Representatives of organs of the African Union, Honorable Vice Chairperson and Commissioners of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Your Excellency Dr. Kabele Matlosa, Director of Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, distinguished delegates of State Party African Charter, representatives of national human rights institutions, representatives of international organizations, representatives of non-governmental organizations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the closing ceremony of the 66th ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. At this point, may I request Excellencies, participants and invited guests to assume a solemn posture for the observance of the African Union Anthem. Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the program of this public closing session is a short one. It comprises of 3 items. The order of proceedings for the closing ceremony will be as follows. First, we will have the reading of the final communique, which will be delivered by Honorable Commissioner Jamesina King. This will be followed by the statement of the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Solomon Ayele Derso. After that, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, chairperson of the African Union Commission, will deliver his closing statement and declare the 66th ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights closed. After the statement of His Excellency, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, this will bring the closing ceremony to an end. I now call upon Honorable Commissioner Jamesina King to read the final communique of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.
Thank you very much, Acting Executive Secretary. Good morning, good afternoon, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, staff, and Secretariat, and esteemed delegates. My duty is to read the final communique of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the Commission, held the 66th Ordinary Session, the session virtually, from 13th July to 7th August 2020 on account of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The opening ceremony was graced by the virtual presence of Her Excellency Minata Samate Sesuma, Commissioner for Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, representing His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the AUC, who declared the session open. The session was chaired by Honorable Commissioner Solomon Ayele Derso, Chairperson of the Commission, assisted by Honorable Commissioner Remy Ngoy Lumbu, Vice Chairperson. The following members of the Commission participated in the session: Honorable Commissioner Solomon Ayele Derso, Chairperson; Honorable Commissioner Remy Ngoy Lumbu, Vice Chairperson; Honorable Commissioner Sylvie Kaitesi Zainabo; Honorable Commissioner Maya Salih Fadel; Honorable Commissioner Jamesina ACL King; Honorable Commissioner Hatem Issem; Honorable Commissioner Marie-Theresa Manuela; Honorable Commissioner Alexia Gertrude Amsbury; Honorable Commissioner Mudford Zachariah Mwadnenga; Honorable Commissioner Marie-Louise Abomo; and Honorable Commissioner Ndiame Gay. Speaking on behalf of the non-governmental organization, the NGO Forum Steering Committee, Mrs. Anna Foster indicated that since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in December 2019, human rights violations have remained a major concern across the globe. She highlighted that in the wake of the pandemic, there have been reported cases of systematic harassment of human rights defenders, the formulation and implementation of legislation to curb the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms, the restriction of freedom of expression through the criminalization of bloggers and internet restrictions, and a rise in gender-based violence caused by lockdown measures. She indicated that the overcrowding of prisons due to non-observance of judicial guarantees and minimum standards in respect of remand detainees continue to create health challenges, which are exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. She called on the Commission to urge member states to respect and implement the international minimum standards on prison conditions and the treatment of prisoners. In conclusion, she congratulated the Commission for all successes recorded in the fulfillment of its mandate, especially on being the first African Union organ to issue a press statement drawing attention to the existence of COVID-19 and identifying the need to adopt a human rights-based approach to the pandemic. Mr. Mohamed Fayek, chairperson of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, delivered a statement on behalf of the network, indicated that national human rights institutions have been at the forefront in supporting the work of the Commission, particularly as it relates to the recently adopted Rules of Procedure of the Commission 2020. He recognized the requirement for state parties to designate focal points to interact with the Commission, a stipulation he indicates will go a long way in supporting the follow-up to the implementation of the Commission's decisions. Mr. Fayek noted with concern the brutal enforcement of quarantine measures by states in an effort to curb the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. He assured the Commission of NANRI's, that's the network's utmost commitment to improving the human rights situation in Africa, and called for a pluralistic and consultative process in ensuring a global and sustainable approach to human rights issues. Professor Benyam Mesmo, Special Rapporteur on Children and Armed Conflict of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, stated that as the COVID-19 outbreak continues to affect the socio-economic stability across the continent, children, being the most vulnerable, are disproportionately affected by the emergency and lockdown measures adopted by states. He expressed concern that millions of children are out of school as a result of the pandemic. He further stated that the pandemic is likely to result in a devastating effect on family functioning by limiting sources of income for households, resulting in limited access to nutritious food and healthcare for children. In addressing these challenges, Professor Mesmo indicated that state parties would benefit from the guidance of both the Commission and the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. He further indicated that the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child issued a guidance note to member states based on the norm of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child to assist states in ensuring that children's rights and welfare are not neglected or violated in the process of enforcing emergency protocols adopted in a bid to curb the spread of the virus. In his statement, Honorable Justice Sylvain Ore, President of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, observed that the holding of the 66th Ordinary Session shortly after experimenting with a virtual session during its 28th Extraordinary Session is a testimony by the Commission in its relentless commitment for the cause of human rights in Africa. He highlighted the complementarity relationship between the Commission and the African Court, which he noted is budding slowly and steadily. Honorable Justice Ore recognized the importance of the role of the Commission to ensure the promotion and protection of human rights during the COVID-19 pandemic and commended the Commission for its press statement on human rights-based effective response to the novel COVID-19 in Africa, published on 24 March 2020. He observed that the press statement was an efficient response in human rights protection within the context of COVID-19, which, amongst other things, gives directions to state parties to place human rights in the center of their response to COVID-19, as well as adopt guidelines on different responses brought by states to COVID-19. Honorable Justice Ore stated that achievements of previous mandate holders have given room for hope and wished the Commission success in its deliberations. In his opening statement, the chairperson of the Commission, Honorable Commissioner Solomon Ayele Dasso, commends his statement by welcoming all stakeholders to the session. He indicated that the work of the Commission has become urgent in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic as opposed to conventional times. He elaborated that COVID-19 and its consequences have excavated and brought to the fore the socio-economic deprivations afflicting the masses, a deprivation which he emphasized has left communities without access to water, sanitation, housing, education, and sustainable employment vulnerable to the scourge of the pandemic. He noted that the nature of the COVID-19 response measures adopted and enforced by states have given rise to a wide range of governance and human rights issues. He raised the concern that states face the danger of the COVID-19 pandemic descending into a human rights crisis. He highlighted that it is for this reason that the Commission issued a press statement which provides guidelines on the effective response to the novel COVID-19 pandemic in Africa on 24 March 2020. This, he stated, was to address issues of excessive restrictions of rights, excessive use of force, and many other human rights violations which had been reported in the course of the pandemic. He noted the economic implications brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, the disruption of the chain of supply, the fall in demand, and the suspension of activities within the airline and tourism sector, which has resulted in revenue loss for most African countries. He emphasized that global solidarity involving economic relief measures, together with national mitigation measures directed at strengthening Africa's healthcare system, food supplies, alleviating financial crises, supporting education, protecting jobs, and keeping households and businesses afloat are the prerequisites necessary to prevent the socio-economic consequences of COVID-19 pandemic from descending into a human rights catastrophe. Delivering the opening statement on behalf of His Excellency Musa Faki Mahama, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Her Excellency Mrs. Minata Samate Sesuma, Commissioner for Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, welcomed the election of the Chairperson of the Commission and the new members of the Commission. She also extended appreciation to the Acting Executive Secretary to the Commission, Ms. Lindiwe Kumalo, and staff of the Secretariat for the organization of the session. Mrs. Sesuma indicated that due to the emerging challenges facing the African continent, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, there is need for state parties to redouble their efforts to ensure that African citizens are not deprived of their socio-economic rights. She recalled the AU decision declaring this decade a decade for human and people's rights, and its 10-year plan of action focusing on the need to promote human rights in Africa. Mrs. Esuma observed that the African continent is already facing many challenges, as mentioned by the chairperson of the Commission, which have been exacerbated by COVID-19. She stated that it is now high time for member states to intensify their efforts in individual and collective levels so as to ensure that the rights are protected by giving effect to all human rights instruments and legal mechanisms. She highlighted aspiration number 3 of Agenda 2063, an Africa with good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights, which is necessary in building a culture of human rights and to safeguard a unified, prosperous Africa. Aligned to this, she called on member states to work together and cooperate with all AU organs they have established to ensure that human rights are fully consolidated and become a reality in Africa. She also urged member states to submit regular reports so as to be in sync with the principles that are enshrined in human rights instruments on shared values. In addition, she stated that member states of the Union have a responsibility to ensure that their responses are all inclusive and non-discriminatory. She emphasized that member states should support the Commission as it adopts measures and recommendations for the promotion and protection of human rights on the continent to assist member states to have an inclusive approach to human rights and respond adequately to the coronavirus. Mrs. Esuma stated that she is convinced discussions and conclusions of the session will improve the efficiency of the African human rights system, and in conclusion, she declared the session open. During the public session, the Commission held a special session on major human rights issues arising in the context of COVID-19 and measures undertaken by the Commission in response. This session gave an opportunity to members of the Commission to make reflections on actions that have been taken in their various capacities to address human rights challenges occasioned by COVID-19 on the continent. The Commission also held a panel discussion on human rights and COVID-19 on the theme, Making Human Rights a Priority During and After COVID-19. The panel, made up of representatives of states, national human rights institutions, and civil society organizations, underscored the necessity for ensuring that the COVID-19 response measures do not lead to violations of rights for addressing structural vulnerabilities of member states, including inequalities in all its various forms. A total of 335 delegates participated in the session, 88 representing state parties from 17 countries, 3 representing African Union organs, 38 representing national human rights institutions, 1 representing international and intergovernmental organizations, and 189 representing African and international NGOs, 14 representing other observers, and 2 representatives from the media. Representatives of the following 9 state parties made statements on the human rights situation in their countries with special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. Republic of Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, Arab Republic of Egypt, Republic of Eritrea, Republic of Gabon, Republic of Malawi, Republic of Rwanda, United Republic of Tanzania, and Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Representatives of the following 6 national human rights institutions also made statements on the human rights situation in Africa, with special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. Sahrawi National Human Rights Commission, National Human Rights Commission of Rwanda, National Human Rights Commission of Algeria, National Commission for Human Rights and Liberties of Cameroon, National Human Rights Commission of Kenya, and National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria. A representative of the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions also made a statement on the human rights situation in Africa with special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. A total of 29 national governmental organizations with observer status with the Commission equally made statements on the human rights situation in Africa with special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. One international organization made a statement on the human rights situation in Africa, also with a special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19, and that was the International Committee of the Red Cross. The right of states to reply was observed by 3 state parties: the Republic of Angola, the Arab Republic of Egypt, and the United Republic of Tanzania. The Commission reported on the status of its relationship and cooperation with national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations, and gave an update on the status of submission of activity reports by national human rights institutions and NGOs. The Commission granted observer status to 2 non-governmental organizations in accordance with the resolution on the criteria for granting and maintaining observer status to non-governmental organizations working on human and people's rights in Africa, namely Human Rights Documentation and Training Center and Center for Rights Education and Awareness. The Commission deferred consideration of 1 application for observer status from the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders in Uganda, National Human Rights Defenders Uganda. This brings the total number of NGOs with observer status with the Commission to 525. The Commission gave an update on the status of submission of periodic reports by state parties. In accordance with Article 62 of the African Charter, the Commission considered the combined 9th and 10th periodic report under the African Charter of the Republic of Mauritius from 2016 to 2019. The following members of the Commission presented their intersession reports, highlighting the activities undertaken in their capacity as commissioners and mandate holders of special mechanisms. The chairperson reporting on his activities as the chairperson of the Commission, the special rapporteur on human rights defenders in Africa and focal point on reprisals, the special rapporteur on the rights of women in Africa, the special rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, the special rapporteur on prisons, conditions of detention, and policing in Africa, the special rapporteur on refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, and migrants in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on extractive industries, environment, and human rights violations in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on indigenous population/communities in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on death penalty, extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary killings and enforced disappearances in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on economic, social, and cultural rights in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on the rights of older persons and people with disabilities in Africa, the chairperson of the working group on communications, the chairperson of the Committee for the Prevention of Torture in Africa, and the chairperson of the Committee for the Protection of the Rights of Persons Living with HIV and those at risk, vulnerable to, and affected by HIV. The presentation of these reports generated reactions, contributions, and questions from state delegates and civil society organizations. During its private sessions, the Commission considered the following: report on follow-up actions, report of the Acting Executive Secretary to the Commission, report of the Communications Audit, report on status of allotment and execution of Budget 2020, report on Budget 2021, working methods of the Commission, and brief on the status of concluding observations and promotion mission reports. Following the coming into effect of its 2020 Rules of Procedure in June 2020, the Commission discussed the practical implementation of administrative seizure of communications under the new rules. In this regard, the Commission considered and adopted a draft guidance note and template for seizures, Secretariat's report on administrative seizures. The Commission reallocated membership of its committees and working groups amongst its members, and these reallocations are hereto annexed and will also be available on the website of the Commission on www.achpr.org. The Commission considered 15 communications as follows. It's adopted 2 communications on the merits, 6 communications on admissibility, of which 2 were declared inadmissible, 2 admissible, 1 deferred, and 1 report back from a previously deferred communication. 7 communications on seizure, of which 1 was seized and 6 deferred to the working group on communications. The Commission adopted resolutions on special mechanisms, country resolutions, and thematic resolutions, which will be finalized and published on the Commission's website. The Commission considered and adopted its 48th activity report, which will be submitted to the 37th ordinary session of the African Union Executive Council and the 35th ordinary session of the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government. The Commission decided to hold its 67th ordinary session in Kigali, Rwanda, from 13th November to 3rd December 2020. Details of the session will be made available on the Commission's website in due course. The Commission expresses its sincere gratitude to state parties, non-governmental organizations, national human rights institutions, and all stakeholders who participated in the maiden virtual ordinary session of the Commission, despite the technical glitches that hindered effective participation. The closing ceremony of the 66th ordinary session took place virtually on 7th August 2020. Done this 7th day of August 2020. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Honorable Commissioner King, for delivering the final communique of the African Commission. At this juncture, I have the pleasure to invite the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Solomon Ayele Deso, to deliver his statement.
I wish to, first of all, thank the acting Secretary of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, our host for today's proceedings. Dear colleagues, excellencies, distinguished representatives of state parties to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, representatives of non-governmental organizations and national human rights institutions, representatives of international organizations, and all protocols observed. I would like to also express my appreciation and gratitude to His Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, represented here today. Colleagues, as have been indicated earlier on, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to this clothing. Thank you all for joining us today from your different locations across the continent and indeed beyond. As you all recall, the Commission in the course of this session focused the deliberations of the public segment of the session on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. And as we have come to realize over the last number of months, the COVID-19 pandemic and the strict measures adopted to curb its spread have posed an unprecedented challenge, not only for health and ill-prepared and ill-equipped healthcare systems on the continent, but also to the realization of a wide range of human and people's rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as civil and political rights. The COVID-19 pandemic on its own is a human rights challenge, as we have pointed out, as it threatens the right to health and the right to life. But the pandemic has also brought up other human rights issues, particularly the nature of the regulations adopted by states parties to the African Charter, and most significantly, as a result of the way those COVID-19 regulations have been enforced, most notably through the use of national security institutions. Beyond that, COVID-19 have also led to major socioeconomic challenge across the continent, accentuating already fragile socioeconomic well-being of the mass of the public on the continent, pushing millions of people into extreme poverty, creating conditions that would make it difficult for the mass of the youth to have expectations for a bright future and to achieve their socioeconomic potentials. In the course of this session, at the beginning of this session, as you all recall, I have spoken about what I called the defining human rights issues of our time: deepening inequalities, widespread poverty, racism, gender oppression, and the crisis of democratic governance, as well as the climate emergency. In the course of the day, national human rights institutions, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, defining challenge have been presented in a very forceful and profound way. And all of these statements highlighted and can be grouped into 5 areas. The first one relates to issues relating to the right to health, and importantly, the readiness and preparedness of states to respond to and manage public health emergencies, such as pandemics. And indeed, the level of preparedness of the healthcare systems of our member states across the continent. And in this respect, the COVID-19 pandemic have accentuated already poor access to healthcare, not only for purpose of dealing with COVID-19, but it has even led to the disruption of other areas of the right to health, such as most notably the disruption that it caused for access to sexual and reproductive health rights, for pre and postnatal care for pregnant women. The pandemic in this sense, therefore, highlighted major gaps in our governance system and in the health sector in terms of fulfilling the right to health. And through fulfilling the right to health, of course, in terms of securing life of the public. The pandemic also laid bare and highlighted the inequalities and the fragilities and vulnerabilities that affect large segment of the public on the African continent, highlighting the pervasiveness of socioeconomic deprivations with devastating consequences, first, of course, for those who are suffering from these socioeconomic devastations, and secondly, for the whole society, of course. The third area relates to the unprecedented level of violations of the rights of women and girls across the continent, leading to the emergence of a pandemic of domestic violence, sexual and gender-based violence within the broader health pandemic. The fourth area that we have observed in the course of this session relates to how the pandemic highlighted and accentuated the democratic deficit, leading to the erosion of democratic systems of governance and the observance and respect for civil and political rights on the continent, as COVID-19 regulation measures are misused, abused, affecting in particular certain sections of society. Fifth, we have also observed that COVID-19 have in particular the most devastating consequences on vulnerable groups and others who experienced heightened levels of restrictions on their rights, including IDPs, refugees, migrants, minorities, and indigenous peoples, homeless people, those operating in the informal sector, those in places of detention. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the statements that we have received, the human rights challenge grouped into these 5 categories include the following: acts of violence carried out by agents of security forces in the course of enforcement of lockdown and curfew measures, which impacted, among others, on the right to life and physical integrity of citizens, underscoring the fact that our security institutions are ill prepared for playing a supportive role in order to in times of public emergencies, and hence the need for a security sector reform that fills the gaps in the doctrines, guidelines, and trainings of security institutions, particularly for purpose of managing pandemics. High levels of unpreparedness to face the public health challenge, and this, among others, due to the lack of investment and under prioritization of socioeconomic rights, including most notably health and social protection systems across Africa. The curtailment of the right of access to information and freedom of expression. Restrictions on social services due to the securitized response to the public health emergency, along with the closure of quote-unquote non-essential services, affecting many, particularly women, in terms of access to various protection services, as well as sexual rights, sexual and reproductive rights. Bans on public assemblies with few or no exception for socially distanced exercise of freedom of assembly, employment of intrusive surveillance technology, including facial recognition systems, tracking software, and expanded surveillance systems. Emergency measures shifting the power and leading to the concentration of authority in the hands of the executive branch, with the potential of eroding democratic checks and balances, particularly by parliaments and the judiciary. Exacerbation of existing gaps in the realization of the rights to education, health, and social protection, which, if not addressed, will further heighten inequality, including as a result of children from most vulnerable backgrounds, running the risk of not only dropping out of school, but also not having access to any school, even if they have the interest to do so, due to lack of access to technology. The exacerbation of existing conflicts in certain countries, including in Libya, in the Sahel, and terrorist activities in the Lake Chad Basin region, the Sahel, as well as northern Mozambique, leading to displacement of tens of thousands of people with their homes and livelihoods destroyed. A drastic reduction in economic activity in the private as well as the public sector, leading to, of course, an erosion and loss of household income, with severe consequences to the socioeconomic well-being of families, most particularly children, affected very highly. Despite COVID-19 having been called the great equalizer, it is clear that the impacts, the health as well as the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic affect certain groups more than others. In particular, groups that suffer from an intersectionality of discrimination and inequality are at particular risk during this pandemic and in its aftermath. During the presentations by various stakeholders, the Commission takes note of the plight of health workers who play an extraordinary role in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And many of you may know that health workers on the African continent have been affected more by COVID-19 than in any other part of the world, despite the fact that the continent's burden of COVID-19 pandemic is lower than other parts of the world. Health workers risk their health, well-being, and lives to ensure that people are able to access healthcare. They have been performing their jobs without adequate protection in very unsafe environments, without being provided with personal protection equipment, in some cases without fair remuneration and compensation while they were working extra hours. And in some instances, we have actually seen them being repressed because they demanded for these conditions to be fulfilled in line with Article 15 of the African Charter. Women and girls, as I pointed out earlier on, who have been affected by an increase, a very high increase in sexual and physical violence, heightened risk of exposure to harmful cultural practices, particularly by young children, as they are forced into child marriage and female genital mutilation, and a higher risk of deprivation of social and economic rights and basic needs, as women and girls particularly operate in the informal sector, which have been devastated by the lockdowns and other COVID-19 response measures. Human rights defenders and women human rights defenders in particular, who continue to face overwhelming challenges arising from pre-existing gender inequalities, but also the way COVID-19 response measures have been enforced. We note in particular, for example, the situation in Zimbabwe, where 3 women have been arrested for protesting, as well as nurses who have been arrested, again, for demanding their working conditions to be improved in the context of COVID-19. Those who are unable to comply with limitations on movement and gatherings, including persons affected by homelessness, persons who live in informal or overcrowded housing, persons operating by carrying out economic activities on a day-to-day basis, including those operating in the informal sector, who bear the brunt of the brutal and highly securitized responses to these problems, giving rise to discrimination of these sectors of the society on account of their socioeconomic conditions. Persons living in rural communities, indigenous communities, as I have indicated earlier on, and the approximately 27 million refugees and internally displaced persons who live in overcrowded places and also in some instances blocked from entry. Prisoners across the continent, journalists whose service is critical in fulfilling the right to freedom of expression and access to information, including access to public health information, who are subjected to physical attacks, arbitrary arrests, and unlawful detentions in many parts of the continent, including, as we have heard during the course of the public session, in Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, among others. LGBT persons who, on the basis of their real or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity, face eviction and other forms of deprivations, including arrest, for example. Informal traders, as pointed out earlier on. Despite all of these challenges, ladies and gentlemen, the Commission also took note of the various positive steps taken by governments across the continent to protect citizens and to work together in the face of the daunting and unprecedented challenge in fulfillment of their obligations under Article 1 of the African Charter to take measures in order to protect the public from the threats that the public faces to its life and health, including all states that took timely steps by instituting public health measures as called for by this Commission in its statement of 28 February 2020, following the advice of the WHO and Africa CDC. States that worked towards preparing for the national health emergency through building and designating facilities for COVID-19 patients, providing training to medical and health personnel, setting up field hospitals, setting also up public stalls for hand washing and sanitizing, ensuring that information about the virus and necessary sanitary measures are made available to the general public. The various states that included prisons and other places of detention in their COVID-19 related contingency plans, who released certain categories of prisoners in order to decongest prisons, provided prisoners with telephone facilities so that prisoners are in touch with their families, where physical contact wouldn't be possible as a result of the pandemic. Some also provided for hearings to proceed via teleconferencing. The Commission commends various countries who delivered their statements during the course of this session, including, for example, the adoption of Presidential Decree 100/20 on 14 April of Angola, which set out a national human rights strategy in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also welcome the adoption of the social protection policy by Rwanda. The Commission also commends Algeria, which contributed to the construction of a field hospital in a Sahrawi refugee camp. The Commission commends measures taken by various countries, such as Eritrea, for active tracing and quarantining of immediate contacts of those diagnosed positive for COVID-19 to curb the spread of the virus. These include, among others, Gabon. The Commission also welcomes states that adopted mitigating measures to address the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic, particularly on the most vulnerable, through the provision of food parcels and other measures, including Egypt, South Africa, and Gabon. The Commission further applauds the decisive steps taken by NHRS to ensure that the important services that they deliver are not interrupted by the pandemic, and also the important role that they play in monitoring human rights violations during the pandemic towards holding those in power accountable. The Commission undertakes to continue supporting all its stakeholders in delivering on our collective responsibilities. It will continue to issue guidelines on human rights-based approach to the pandemic and its consequences, has also decided during this session to prepare guidelines and principles on various aspects. In addition, during this session, the Commission has adopted a series of resolutions addressing various areas of this pandemic. Given that this pandemic would have very serious consequences, not only on existing human rights challenges, but also in new areas, the Commission would continue to engage meaningfully in order to address these challenges. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Commission is acutely aware that in addition to the human rights challenge arising from or worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic, other human rights violations continue to be perpetrated. And indeed, the Commission received statements in these areas as well, including, for example, the testimony that we have received from Mauritania in relation to the impact of slavery and the poor implementation of anti-slavery law on those affected by slavery and those descendants of slaves. The clampdown on public interest litigation in Tanzania through the amendment of the law, and in particular, the prohibition of media from using local languages for purpose of broadcasting, which is contrary to Article 9 of the African Charter. The persistence of the conflict situation in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, together with the resurgence of Boko Haram terrorist attacks, as we have heard from the National Human Rights Institution of Cameroon. The ongoing intimidation and threats to reproductive health rights advocates across the continent. The diminishing civic space, as have been pointed out, and the attacks, particularly with pandemic, against persons with albinism, based on superstitious beliefs. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Commission is aware that during the time of this global pandemic, governments are more burdened than usual, and therefore the Commission strongly commends positive developments in state parties towards the promotion and protection of human rights during this time, including the criminalization of FGM by the government of Sudan, the positive steps taken since December 2019 by Sierra Leone to ensure that pregnant girls will once again be allowed to attend school, the enactment of anti-trafficking laws in Malawi and Uganda, the successful and peaceful holding of elections in a number of some African countries, most notably in Malawi, which we commend, particularly the role played by the judiciary in Malawi. The adoption by Niger in January of a bill to criminalize torture. The adoption by Rwanda, as I pointed out, of a new social protection policy. Dear brothers and sisters, fellow Africans, in the 4 weeks since the start of this session, COVID-19 infections across the continent have continued to rise. And the Commission therefore urges and understands the need for continuing use of the public health response measures. But the use of these public health response measures have to be very tailor-made and adapted to the current realities. Instead of a total ban on human rights, there is a need for adapting them to the new realities by emphasizing in particular the use of face masks and also the possibility of allowing assemblies in open spaces while observing social distancing, sanitization, hand washing, and all. The Commission urges states in doing so to respect the rule of law, to ensure that any limitations on rights enshrined in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights are legitimate, proportionate, necessary, and applied without discrimination. It is likely that the repercussions of this pandemic will continue to impact on all of us. In this regard, the Commission has taken steps to become more innovative in the execution of its various duties. We call on all stakeholders, including states, NHRIs, NGOs, to continue to collaborate and engage with the Commission as various of our activities continue to be delivered, both through virtual means and other ways. While aware of the limitations of this situation, the Commission trusts that with the continued collaboration and support of all, we can continue to carry out our crucial mandate of ensuring the promotion and protection of human and people's rights on the continent, while understanding that the challenge that we face is not an ordinary challenge. The challenge that we face is extraordinary and therefore requiring an extraordinary response. As the human rights community, our approach has often tended to be focusing on reacting after events. We can't afford to do that. Our approach in the human rights community has been one that prioritized and emphasized civil and political rights. We can't afford to neglect economic, social, and cultural rights in the new arena that we are in. Economic, social, and cultural rights must be the front and center of our response and our engagement moving forward, while, of course, upholding and securing civil and political rights. As the Charter in its preamble says, these are interdependent and not separable. They have to go together. But the conditions are such that we need to invest more. We need to prioritize more economic, social, and cultural rights in order to ensure that the devastation that COVID-19 created wouldn't be repeated should another pandemic arrive next time. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow me to express my deep gratitude to my colleagues, the Vice Chairperson, the members of the Commission, the Acting Secretary, staff of the Secretariat, and the interpreters for the work that has been accomplished during this session. I have to tell you that this hasn't been an easy session. It has been a very difficult session with internet connections disrupting our proceedings and thereby derailing the process of our activities. But with the cooperation, patience, and indulgence of all these colleagues, we have managed to successfully accomplish the task that we have set out for. I believe that despite challenging circumstances, we were able to conduct our session to its high standard. It is my hope and prayer that by the time we convene the next session in November, we will be able to convene our session as normal, and we will look forward to welcoming you all. I thank all of you for your kind attention and for your active participation in the course of this session, and for continued commitment during this pandemic to work towards sustainable solutions for the defining human rights challenge of our time. Finally, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my profound gratitude and thanks to the Republic of Mauritius that have presented us with the unique opportunity of reviewing its periodic state report. a report that have also afforded us the opportunity of understanding why socioeconomic rights are so important, and investing in them is critical in order to weather the threats that comes from pandemics like COVID-19. Mauritius is one of the countries that successfully limited the community spread of the pandemic because of its investment in social and economic rights in the health system, and because of the level of its preparedness. Mauritius also teaches us one very important fact, which is the only way that we can avoid the devastations that come from pandemics, and the only way we can rise to the challenge of the human rights issues of this moment is by mobilizing policies and responses that address inequalities, that address socioeconomic deprivations, that address gender oppression. And this is through investing in poverty reduction, by targeting inequalities in access to education, health, employment, and other areas, through what Mauritius calls its Marshall Plan against poverty. There is a lot of lesson to be learned from that. And we do hope that we use that for also shaping our engagement moving forward, not only at the level of the African Commission, but also the African Union system broadly. Once again, thank you very much for your kind attention. And we look forward to your continued engagement with our commission and its country rapporteurs, as well as its special mechanisms. Thank you very much again.
You switched off? Switch. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson Deso, for your insightful statement. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is now my singular honor to invite His Excellency, Dr. Khabele Mahlosa, Director of Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, representing His Excellency, Musa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, to deliver a closing and declare the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights officially closed. Dr. Mahlosa.
Director of this solemn ceremony, Madam Lindiwe Kumalo, my sister. Thank you for your introductory remarks at the beginning of this closing session, and for facilitating this important segment of the ordinary session. Honorable Commissioner Solomon Derso, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honorable Commissioners of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, representatives of state parties to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights here present, representatives of international organizations, representatives of the African national human rights institutions, representatives of civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations, colleagues and staff from the African Union Commission and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say all protocols observed so that I don't leave anybody out of the salutations. It's my utmost pleasure to deliver this closing remarks on behalf of both the Chairperson of the African Union Commission and the AU Commissioner for Political Affairs. The Commissioner was supposed to deliver the remarks on behalf of the Chair, Madam Moderator, but she's unable to join us today due to circumstances beyond her control. Given her unflinching commitment to the promotion and protection of human and people's rights on the continent, she's certainly with us in spirit today. The Commissioner officiated, as you'll recall, during the opening of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on behalf of the chairperson. From the onset, let me congratulate, moderator, let me congratulate Honorable Commissioner Dr. Solomon Derso, chairperson of the Commission, and all the honorable commissioners of the African Commission, as well as the acting secretary and the entire secretariat of the Commission for the successful convening of your first virtual ordinary session under the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I also extend my profound gratitude to all representatives of the AU member states, civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, all despite the of COVID-19 to participate in this historic 66th ordinary session. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my task today is a simple one as we wind up a very successful ordinary session of the African Commission. This was a special session which compelled us to focus our eyes on COVID-19 and its impact on human rights. My concluding remarks, moderator, will highlight only three main issues for consideration by this august body going forward. Firstly, as we collectively address the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Africa, we need to deliberately transcend concerns with civil liberties and political rights alone. That's my first point. This amounts to a minimalist approach to the promotion and protection of human and people's rights in Africa. We need to also focus forcefully on socioeconomic and cultural rights. If we do not maintain a balanced focus on this full set of rights, we run the real risk of adopting a partial approach to the overall mandate of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, especially at this critical period of COVID-19, when states are responding in ways that curtail all these rights in their entirety. Let us address human rights in their totality and avoid the neoliberal tendency to privilege political rights and civil liberties over and above socioeconomic and cultural rights. This is the preferred maximalist approach to the promotion and protection of human and people's rights in Africa. And I hope that the African Commission adopts this. And I'm happy listening to the chairperson that this is the route you are taking. We would like to encourage you in that direction, to balance the rights in their entirety without falling into the temptation of just dealing with civil liberties and political rights, because that's just half of the full story. Second message, moderator. Probably more than any other time before, and this builds on the first one, probably more than any other time before, this is now the moment for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and other key stakeholders to promote and protect the right to development more vigorously. The right to development more vigorously. And I'm saying this because this also reminds me of a story of a Somali elder of Baidwa, who defines development as the satisfaction of 5 basic human needs as follows. And I quote him, that elder, a Somali elder from Baidwa province. Satisfaction of 5 basic needs. First, quote, first is water. It is the first thing needed to live. Without it, a plant, an animal, or a baby dies. Second is food. Without enough of it, life is miserable and short. Third, once water and food are one, is health. Otherwise, the human being becomes sick. Fourth is education. Once a human being has water, food, and health, he or she needs to learn to open new horizons and unlock new possibilities. And there is a fifth, peace and order. Without this, none of the four basic needs can be sustained. This is how, in a very, very practical way, the Somali elder of Baidwa province defined development. You will agree with me, Excellencies, that the cost of COVID-19 on development, as defined by the Somali elder, is enormous. Various economic sectors, e.g. the airlines, tourism, hospitality, etc., are taking a big knock due to COVID-19. Massive borrowing from international multilateral financial institutions, such as the IMF, is skyrocketing, raising concerns about debt burden later on, which may generate popular protests in due course. The social sector is the biggest victim of COVID-19 policy response. Given that there are more women and young people in this sector, COVID-19 therefore hits hardest on this already marginalized and vulnerable social groups. The increasing incidence of massive COVID-19 corruption related to procurement of personal protective equipment in many of our AU member states is a major issue for serious concern. As the Commission redoubles its efforts in promoting and protecting the right to development, it is imperative that the rights of marginalized and vulnerable social groups such as women, youth, people with disabilities, children, older persons, refugees, internally displaced persons, migrants, homeless persons, stateless persons, and prisoners are prioritized. But even as we do this, we would like to implore the Commission, working with relevant organs of the Union, in particular the African Union on Corruption based in Arusha, that the Commission should also address, should also play a proactive role in tackling corruption that is now on a massive scale around COVID response in terms of procurement of PPEs. So I think it's important that the Commission tackles that, because that's also denial of rights of people that have to be, whose lives and livelihoods have to be protected. So the Commission really has a stake in that, working with our board, anti-corruption board based in Arusha. Thirdly and finally, moderator, almost all 54 African countries affected by COVID-19 have responded through various forms of emergency measures, including lockdowns, declaration of states of disasters and states of emergencies. To enforce these measures, large numbers of security forces have been deployed in the streets of many of our member states. This is the perfect storm for human rights, undoubtedly. This is the perfect storm for human rights. The net effect of this policy response has been unprecedented militarization of society. Unprecedented militarization of society under democratic, in a democratic setting. It has never happened before. This is the first time we see this massive militarization under democratic settings taking place on the continent. There are numerous instances in many countries where both the police and the military have abused their powers and unleashed havoc on citizens under the pretext of enforcing COVID-19 regulations. While lives have been lost to the pandemic, other lives, unfortunately, have been lost due to the brutality of security forces. If we are not careful, the gains made on the human rights front will be reversed back to the heyday of authoritarianism of both civilian and military varieties of the 1960s and 1960s up to the 1980s on the continent. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights, therefore, has to grab the bull by the horns to ensure that emergency measures, including lockdowns, states of disaster, states of emergencies, are temporary and not permanent features of the governance landscape on our continent. The Commission has to work hard to ensure that security forces deployed in the streets restrain themselves and respect human rights at all times. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, it will be remiss of me before I wind up not to say a few words on the AU theme for 2020 in the context of your ordinary session, 66th ordinary session of the African Commission. The heads of state and government declared 2020 as the year of silencing the guns, creating conducive conditions for Africa's development. This theme reminds us that for development to occur within the framework of Agenda 2063, Africa needs peace, security, and stability. Africa also needs democracy, constitutionalism, justice, human rights, and rule of law for development to happen. This is the definition of development by the Somali elder of Baidwa that we talked about earlier. Peace, democracy, human rights, and development must be pursued simultaneously during the current COVID-19 pandemic. The African Commission is called upon, therefore, to advance the 2020 theme of the AU with special focus on human and people's rights in the context of COVID-19. And I hope and trust that your next ordinary session, and I think I learned that it's going to be in Kigali in November, I would like to recommend that there should be a specific segment of the session dedicated to the AU theme of the year, silencing the guns, creating conducive conditions for Africa's development, linking it to human rights directly. Madam Moderator, last but not least, on behalf of the African Union Commission, on behalf of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, I would like to express our appreciation to the leadership and the staff of the African Commission on Human Rights for this historic and most successful session despite the COVID-19 challenges. On behalf of the chairperson, it's my singular honor and pleasure to declare this 66th ordinary session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights closed. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Mahlosa. Provoking perspectives on human rights, the human rights implications for COVID, arising from the COVID pandemic, and also for the range of critical calls to action that you have addressed to the Commission for consideration. Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the close of the closing ceremony of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It remains for me to thank all Excellencies present and distinguished ladies and gentlemen for honoring our invitation and to wish you and your families health and safety in these very challenging times that we find ourselves in. By way of final announcement, I would like to remind members of the media that they are kindly invited to a virtual press conference that commences at 11:30 hours GMT. Thank you so much and have a good day.